Can you believe this woman called the cops when I refused her a ranch fine? Day one of moving into my dream Lake City ranch. This woman Karen hits me with a $200 fine for parking my moving truck. When I refused to pay her ridiculous violation, she smugly called the cops like I was some dangerous criminal. She was standing there with this evil grin, probably thinking she'd found another easy victim to bully. But the second that police officer looked at me and said those words that made Karen literally froze like a statue, I knew she had absolutely no clue who she'd just declared war on. Comment where you're watching from. You know what? I thought retirement would be simple. After 30 years as Appalachia captain, dealing with the worst humanity had to offer, I figured I'd earn some peace and quiet. That's exactly why I bought this beautiful lakeside ranch. Picture-perfect views, quiet neighbors, and enough space to finally breathe without worrying about the next crisis call coming in over the radio. Man, was I completely wrong about those quiet neighbors? It was exactly 8 o'clock in the morning on moving day when I pulled up with that big rental truck. The morning sun was making the lake sparkle like diamonds, and I actually found myself smiling for the first time in months. This was it. My sanctuary. My reward for 3 decades of putting criminals behind bars and keeping communities safe. I was backing the truck into my driveway, careful not to oblock the street when I heard this overly sweet voice calling out behind me. "Welcome to our lakeside ranch community," she chirped, and I turned around to see what would become my worst nightmare. There she was, a woman in her late 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that seemed genuine enough at first glance. She was carrying a plate of what looked like fresh-baked chocolate chip cookies and had this official-looking leather folder tucked under her arm like she was conducting business. Everything about her screamed, professional community leader. But something in her eyes reminded me of those criminals who smile while they're planning to destroy your life. Call it cop instinct, but I immediately felt uneasy. "I'm Karen Mitchell, your HOA president," she announced with the kind of practiced authority that made my jaw clench involuntarily. 3 decades of law enforcement had taught me to recognize power. Hungry personalities, and this woman was practically radiating control issues. "We're so excited to have you by the lake. I brought you a welcome packet with all our lakeside community rules and regulations." She handed me both the cookies and the folder, but her eyes were already scanning my moving truck like a detective examining a crime scene. I introduced myself as Robert Kane and thanked her politely for the welcome gesture. The cookies actually smelled amazing, and she seemed pleasant enough as she explained things like trash pickup schedules and community events down by the lake dock. But then, and I swear this transformation happened in less than 10 seconds, her entire personality shifted like someone had flipped a switch. Her warm smile vanished completely. Her voice went ice cold and she pointed at my moving truck like it had personally insulted her family heritage. "That monstrosity violates our Lakeside Ranch Aesthetic Code Section 12B, she declared, suddenly pulling out her smartphone to take photographs from multiple angles like she was documenting evidence at a crime scene. I just stood there staring at her, completely baffled by the sudden personality change. "Ma'am, this is just a standard rental moving truck. I specifically checked with the county regulations, and temporary moving vehicles are completely legal on residential streets during daytime hours." But Karen wasn't listening to my explanation at all. She was too busy scribbling something on an official-looking citation form that she'd somehow magically produced from that leather folder. My police training kicked into high gear. I recognized manipulation tactics and shakedown operations when I encountered them. This woman had clearly done this exact same routine before, probably multiple times, and she'd perfected her approach to intimidate new residents into compliance. "County regulations don't override our established community standards," she said with supreme confidence, pripping off a carbon copy and shoving the paper directly at my chest. "That's a $200 fine for violating our aesthetic standards and disrupting the lakeside ambiance. Payment is due immediately in full or will be forced to take much more serious action." I looked down at this ridiculous piece of paper. It wasn't even properly filled out. Just hastily scrolled nonsense about unsightly commercial vehicles disrupting community harmony. I handed that bogus citation right back to her without hesitation. I'm not paying this fine. It's not legitimate, and you don't have any legal authority to issue it. That's when Karen's friendly neighborhood mask completely disintegrated. Her face turned bright red, and she launched into this dramatic speech about new residents who don't respect established community values and people who think rules don't apply to them personally. She was putting on quite the performance, beautied. Interrogated enough criminals to recognize when someone was lying through their teeth. The most disturbing part was that Karen actually seemed to believe her own lies. She wasn't just running a scam. She genuinely thought she had the right to extort money from me on my first day in the neighborhood. I came here for peace and quiet, not to deal with another investigation. But it was becoming crystal clear that this woman viewed me as some kind of threat to her little kingdom of control. Can you guess what rank this police officer just recognized? What do you think Karen's face looked like when she heard it? Type your guess below. I bet you can predict what happens next. Karen whipped out her phone with the kind of dramatic flair you'd expect from a soap opera actress. Fine, she snapped, her voice dripping with fake authority. If you refuse to comply voluntarily with our community standards, I'll have to call the proper authorities to handle this situation. I almost started laughing right there on the spot. After 3 decades in law enforcement, I was being threatened with, well, law enforcement. But I kept my mouth shut and did exactly what any smart person would do in this situation. I pulled out my own phone and started recording everything. She dialed 911. And I listened to what can only be described as an Academy Award-worthy performance. Yes, I need police assistance at Lakeside Ranch Estates immediately, she said, her voice suddenly trembling with just the right amount of fear. I have an extremely aggressive new resident who's been threatening me and completely violating her established community standards. He's got this massive commercial truck blocking our residential street. And when I tried to politely help him understand our neighborhood rules, he became increasingly hostile and intimidating toward me. I stood there absolutely amazed at her creativity and boldness, hostile and intimidating. I barely raised my voice above a normal conversation level. But Karen was clearly a master manipulator who'd perfected this exact routine over years of practice. She positioned herself to look small and vulnerable, clutching that leather folder like it contained evidence of some major felony crime. Officers, I'm genuinely concerned about this attitude and potential for escalation, she continued into the phone. About 15 minutes later, which was honestly the fastest police response time I'd seen in years. 2 patrol cars pulled up to the scene. 2 young officers stepped out. Probably couldn't have been more than 25 years old. And I could immediately tell they were buying into Karen's victim performance completely. Officer Martinez looked at me like I was some neighborhood bully terrorizing helpless elderly women, while Officer Thompson listened intently to Karen's increasingly dramatic story about my threatening behavior. Officers, thank goodness you arrived so quickly, Karen said, her voice still trembling with that perfectly practiced vulnerability. This man has been extremely aggressive and completely dismissive of our lakeside community standards from the moment he arrived here. She handed Thompson her citation like it was official police evidence, explaining how I'd refused to respect legitimate HOA authority and made threatening statements about not following rules. Martinez asked to see my identification while Thompson continued listening to Karen's sob story about how my disruptive presence was already affecting the peaceful nature of our established lakeside community. I handed over my driver's license without argument and kept my mouth completely shut. In my experience, it was always better to let liars dig their own graves deeper before revealing any information that might help your case. But then something interesting started happening. Martinez was examining my license with this confused expression on his face. And then he glanced over at the vehicle registration sting on my truck's dashboard. I'd left my retired police association card visible there. Just an old habit from my active duty days that I'd never bothered changing. Martinez did a complete double take, studying my face much more carefully than before. Sir, excuse me for asking, but were you previously in law enforcement? Before I could even answer his question, a third patrol car pulled up to our little gathering. Out stepped Sergeant Williams, a guy who had to be pushing 50 and was clearly the senior officer responding to this call. He took one quick look at the entire situation, Karen still playing the victim role. Two young cops looking gun-stained about the whole thing, and me standing calmly with my hands visible and non-threatening, and walked straight over to examine my truck more closely. Williams noticed